Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to today's special, and I stress on the word special, episode and edition of the Minority Report. I want to welcome you all our viewers, and those of you who are now logging in. We trust that you will join us for the entirety of this particular programming today, as we saw it fit to come to you, the public, and to ventilate on issues that we see unfolding in the public domain presently in Tobago. Before we get into the program, we are actually going to go right into a clip that is very interesting, and we think that it should set the tone for the discussion as we proceed this afternoon. So I'll ask the director to take us right into that video clip.
You can shuffle that same deck of cards a million times. The outcome will almost be the same, because the possibilities are limited by the number of cards in that deck. And so all that we are seeing is the moving around of incompetence from one area to another area.
So folks, as we would have heard that from the now Chief Secretary, his own words. Joining me this afternoon in studio, I have a full complement. So let's get right into our introductions. I'll begin at my immediate right, Minority Councillor, Mrs. Petal Daniel Benoit. Thanks for joining us today.
It's always good to be here.
To her immediate right, Assemblyman Kelvon Morris, Minority Leader of the Tobago House of Assembly.
Good afternoon, each and everyone, and always a pleasure to speak to the people of Tobago on matters important to all of us.
And to your immediate right, Senator Lawrence Hislop, who is not only the co-host but a fixture on the Minority Report as well.
Good afternoon, Marlon. Good afternoon, Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago. It is a privilege again to be here at an interesting time in the day, but we're glad to be here.
So folks, those who are logged on, I want to encourage you to share the live. Let's get this link going out there, and let's participate in this afternoon's discussion. So to the panel, and I think the director would let me know when our online guest has logged in. To the panel, we saw a very interesting scenario unfold this morning, something that all of Tobago has been waiting with bated breath for. And I would give each of you the opportunity in your opening statements to describe how you felt about the release of the THA reshuffle. Minority Councillor.
Thank you again. Good afternoon. I think it's afternoon, all of you listening and locked on. I think we have been hearing about this reshuffle for some time. It first started in 2022. Then we heard about it in 2023, and some weeks ago, it came to the front burner again. And I think all of us were in great anticipation as to what the reshuffle will look like. And to see the press release this morning, I was a bit disappointed. And I think most Tobagonians, right-thinking Tobagonians, was disappointed with what we saw as a quote-unquote reshuffle. Because if you consider the Tobago House of Assembly Act, it speaks to secretaries having general direction and control over the divisions. And as we were having a discussion before the program started, what were the reasons for reshuffling the members of the executive? But what we saw is a reshuffle of, or a movement of assistant secretaries, a promotion of one and a demotion of the other. And if it is that the secretaries have general direction and control, and we have a reshuffle, why are we not seeing the movement of secretaries rather than assistant secretaries? So for me, my initial thoughts are very disappointing, and it's something that we would have looked forward to hearing what it was for some period in time, and disappointing.
Minority Leader.
Well, I would just like to echo the sentiments of Councillor Benoit, and just to jog our memories, if we take our minds back, we would recall that in 2022, this reshuffle was promised, and then it was delayed, and then it never happened. And then sometime in 2023, coming down to the end of December, we were promised again a reshuffle, and we were told by the Chief Secretary at that time that this reshuffle we would see significant strategic alignment as to greater improve the delivery of this current THA executive. And therefore, Tobagonians began to really look forward to this reshuffle with a sense of hope, of change, of behavior, because up to that time, Tobagonians had not seen the change that they voted for. And therefore, when the Chief Secretary again resurrected this talk about a reshuffle after being pressured by the minority and others in Tobago, demanding some kind of change in action, we were told that it would come, and it would come with some significant changes. Yet today, we are given the courtesy of a press release in the first instance.
Exactly.
And not even an interface with the media as to explain the rationale for the changes. But that is how the Chief Secretary views Tobagonians, not even to give us the respect of proper clarification, because we have questions. And if you look at this press release and the changes, one must firstly appreciate and understand why a reshuffle. And a reshuffle is done to achieve certain fundamental changes important for delivery. And the first one is about performance. Who is performing? Who is underperforming? How can I better increase delivery in the divisions and so forth? And therefore, that would be one of your criteria. Then you would look about the credibility of the divisions and the personnel in the divisions, the secretaries, assistant secretaries in those divisions and their credibility. And of course, 3, you would consider the people. Where are the concerns of the people, and where does those concerns lie? How can I better change around personnel to improve public perception and etc.? And if we are to take those 3 considerations as criteria, then you then have to ask your question when you look at the reshuffle. How does this fulfill those criteria? How will these changes effect change? And Councillor Benoit said it perfectly. If you understand the responsibility of a secretary as opposed to an assistant secretary, then you would understand that this reshuffle is nothing but a sham.
Yeah.
It is the action of a cowardly bully that just does not have the testicular fortitude to make the changes where the changes are required. And that is quite disappointing. I am also disappointed, just as Councillor Benoit and the rest of Tobago, because Tobago waited with bated breath. Tobago waited to exhale. Tobago waited in hope that they would see some inkling of change that might inspire them to believe that something different will be on the horizon. And by promoting one assistant secretary and demoting one secretary, I do not foresee this reshuffle having any serious impact on the current failed trajectory of this administration. And finally, what is even more disappointing is the fact that this chief secretary continues to play games with Tobagonians, because here it is. You have a reshuffle. You have indicated that the position of Secretary of Finance will also be changed at a date at July, with effect July 1st. Yet in announcing this reshuffle, you failed to level with Tobagonians. You failed to be transparent. You failed to be open. And you failed to even address something as fundamental as who will be the Secretary of Finance. So here again, Tobagonians have to wait with bated breath to find out who will be the Secretary of Finance. So, yes, I am quite disappointed. I was hopeful in the beginning. Of course, I want to commend Mr. Joel Sampson. I want to wish him all the best in this new portfolio. But I'm sure Tobagonians feel slighted and feel like they were sold short because they expected much more.
Senator Islam.
I want to agree with both the councillor and minority leader. But I want to take it from this standpoint that what we saw this morning is what we should have expected. I honestly believe what we saw is what we should have expected. Leadership is what is lacking in the Tobago House of Assembly. And when you have a situation that requires the leadership to stand up and stand out, we have not seen that since this administration took office. What we've seen from the leadership of the Assembly is a constant deflection, is a constant blame game, and it's just a lack of the ability to function. And this is from the top right down. So what we saw this morning, what the population got this morning, I believe should have been expected. And the reality we have to also face is that, and as minority leader and minority councillors spoke to it, the movement of the rationale for a reshuffle is to align one's capabilities to an area that you believe that they can function more effectively, because as the Act says, the secretary has general direction over the division. So you want to align them to an area that you believe that they'll be able to function effectively. What we've seen since the administration, and rightly so, we would have given this administration a honeymoon period, as all administrations get when they just come in, to find their footing, to get acclimatized to working within the government system and so on. But what we've seen is persons already placed from the inception in places where they were ineffective. And you've left them in those positions. And I also think that as it relates to transparency, a claim that you made before getting into governance, that you owe the population of Tobago a rationale, and I think the minority leader alluded to that, a rationale for the movement of only one secretary. And not only moving that secretary to another, to the head of another division, but what is considered by all means a demotion. And I want to ask the question, is it because this secretary is not necessarily a member of the original organization that came into office? Is it because that this secretary was the leader of another political entity? Because you haven't touched anybody else. And you have not even moved this secretary to another division in terms of heading the division.
It's a demotion.
What you've done, and people could spin it all they want, that is a demotion. If you move a secretary from the position of secretary to assistant secretary,
it's a demotion.
It is a demotion. It's a demotion in what? Remuneration package? It is a demotion in responsibility. It is a demotion. And whether we could spin it, we could flip it, we could turn it upside down, anyhow we take it. It's a demotion. And I think the chief secretary, that Tobago deserves an explanation as to why this secretary is the only one that was demoted and not given the opportunity to function in another division as secretary. And so, to me, it's not disappointing what we received, but it was expected, because we saw what you gave for 2.5 years, 3 years, going on 3 years. We saw what you gave. And so what we got this morning was just a continuation of what Tobago has been receiving from this administration. A lack of leadership and a lack of true governance. And I honestly believe that the administration has gotten to its peak in terms of its ability to govern the island. I do not expect anything better from the administration. I don't expect an improvement, which is really what a reshuffle should create. It should create an environment where we are going to see a change in your trajectory. But I think that the administration has gotten to their peak in terms of their ability to govern this island. And what we are going to see now is either a plateau or downward. And it's
So-
just unfortunate, but that's where we sit.
So I'll ask the director to put up the release once more. So for those of you who are looking on and persons are actually messaging saying they have not yet been privy to the information as pertain to the reshuffle. So Mr. Director, could you pull it back up so we can go through and persons can have the benefit of understanding what were the changes that have been made?
And Mr. Moderator, both the minority leader and the senator spoke to the idea of getting some explanation from the chief secretary as to the rationale for the movement. And if we look at what was published today as the reshuffle, we have a situation where there are complaints about all the divisions in the Tobago House of Assembly. When you look at the sectors, all the sectors are in decline. If you look at the tourism sector is in shambles. We are seeing where the numbers are being buffered to show an image that is
false perception.
False.
Yeah.
Yes. I think this is the worst the tourism sector has been in a while. Yes. And when you look at other destinations, you are seeing growth, you are seeing a rebound coming out of COVID. Tobago is one of the only islands that have not yet
Has constantly been in decline.
But before, so instead of having a reshuffle of that secretary, we saw that the assistant secretary
Was
moved to the Division of Health. If you go to the construction sector is also at a standstill.
Yeah.
Indigenous Tobago contractors have not been receiving the major contracts on the island. They have had to send home workers, a number of workers. We are seeing it has now become commonplace where daily rated workers are being paid late, delayed, 3-4 fortnights late.
That's a norm.
We have heard allegations of corruption, allegations of misbehavior in public office. And what we saw in the Division of Infrastructure, the secretary staying in place and the assistant secretary being promoted. And you could go like that throughout all the divisions. We have TATCO and the Division of Agriculture. So you see the alignment of the assistant secretary and not the secretary.
So the question we can ask, therefore, and this is why I describe the chief secretary as a cowardly bully, because it seems to me that what he has done is taken the position that I'm only going to treat with those persons or the low-hanging fence, the low-hanging fruits. I'm only going to treat in a real sense with my assistant secretaries who I feel are easier to just move across. Rather than treat with the big boys, because the question, and we live in Tobago, we all live here, and I don't think there's no division that has been under public scrutiny more than the division of infrastructure. And we have seen that division not only spirited away over $300 million, but we have seen them embroiling a number of controversy, including breaking the law. Time and time again with respect to the environmental laws of this country. And we have seen a secretary has shown that he has absolutely no regard for process, for law, for order, or for anyone. Yeah. And therefore, is it that the chief secretary by this very decision is saying to us that what we have been hearing on the ground is actually true?
Yes.
And is it that this secretary is untouchable? And we have to speak the facts and speak it in plain truth. And the chief secretary must answer and tell us what was the justification for not reviewing the role of this secretary. Yeah. Is it that you really can't touch him? Is it that he's too big to touch? And even if you go across the board, what about settlements? You're hearing a number of rumblings down there in the way that division is being managed. Yeah. Is it also that White is too big to touch? And is it that you only touch the pastor because he perhaps might be the lowest, both literally and figuratively, and he's not as senator?
And that's a question we have to ask as well.
And if I was Secretary Baines, I would now ask myself, what is wrong with me?
Exactly.
Because if I'm seeing all these bad behavior across the board, and Those persons
Are
weren't touched.
untouchable.
Untouched. But yet, I am the one that is plucked out from.
And not only that, Secretary Baines is very vocal concerning the administration on behalf of the administration with his weekly radio program, speaking very positively
One of
about
the few people
one
that
of the
actually
few people
speak.
that is out there speaking constantly, and for all of that work, you get a demotion.
Yeah.
Because the rumors been
it's
going
surprising.
around. The rumors been going around. I'm sure you've heard it, where a secretary was approached to be moved, and the secretary basically
Say
said,
he's not moving.
"You're not moving."
yeah.
And there are talks
see
as
that
to
again.
perhaps why you can't move him. So, Chief Secretary, are those talks, those things we are hearing on the ground? Is it true? Is it true that you cannot touch the secretary because of certain reasons and information that he may have
Guys,
that's against you, Chief Secretary?
We also have now our next guest, who is now logged on with us. Joining the conversation, we have Mr. Ansel Dennis, the political leader of the People's National Movement Tobago Council. Welcome, Mr. Dennis, to the conversation. I'm sure that
Good evening.
very
Good evening.
up and running with
Good
what we're
afternoon.
discussing here now.
Yes, I've been trying my best to follow, although I was in the process of, getting to government work. So I decided to take some time off now on my lunch period to join what I consider to be a very important discussion on, the governance of this island of Tobago, just to make sure that I'm being heard clearly and seen clearly. Transmission is good, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, I've been following the discussion concerning the reshuffle, but I just want to reiterate the point that this reshuffle was promised by this Chief Secretary approximately a year ago, or perhaps it was more than a year ago. And there are several reasons why any Chief Secretary or any Prime Minister or leader of any government may want to engage in a reshuffle. Sometimes it's due to a shift in policy focus. Sometimes it's due to change in the arrangements of the administration. But oftentimes it's also due to a lack of performance on the part of some secretaries. And I was very hopeful a year ago when I first heard about the reshuffle, because I felt that, given a year of poor performance, given a year of failure on the part of this administration, that it was really time for the Chief Secretary to, take a look at what was happening and make some much needed changes. He held back on the reshuffle back then. There were a number of reasons bandied about in the public domain, including the fear of a particular secretary. And here we are, more than a year later, the reshuffle has finally materialized. And I want to say that it is void, it is null, it is ineffective, it makes absolutely no sense, it will not make a difference in the governance of Tobago. I don't expect the misfortunes of this particular THE administration to change at all. And yes, we know that the pack is really a pack of jokers. And if you have a pack of jokers, as much as you may reshuffle them, you are going to always have a joker being played. But more than it being a pack of jokers, we are clearly seeing a situation where the Chief Secretary is in fact a coward. Because I can point to at least 4 secretaries who have been performing worse than Terence Baines. Terence Baines is no performer. Terence Baines is no star or hero in any way. He's very incompetent. But I can point again to at least 4 secretaries who have been performing significantly worse. Yet, having talked about a reshuffle for more than a year, the Chief Secretary comes this morning to hoodwink the people of Tobago, to tell us that he's only going to demote Terence Baines, to promote Joel Sampson, and congratulations to him. I wish him all the best in his new portfolio. but he's also telling us that he's prepared to engage in the movement of all the other assistant secretaries. The Tobago House of Assembly Act gives general direction and control of a division to the office of a secretary, and therefore shifting around assistant secretaries. It will have no impact, it will have no bearing, it will have no effect on the administration of any division in the Tobago House of Assembly. So let's make that clear. You cannot rearrange assistant secretaries and expect there to be any change. The power within a division, the responsibility within any division lies with the secretary of that division, and that is the law. That is the Tobago House of Assembly Act 40 of 1996. So Trevor James has been chosen as the sacrificial lamb to really rescue this reshuffle, because I can tell you that I was credibly informed that up to yesterday, there was going to be no reshuffle of any secretary. Of course, attempts were made to reshuffle a number of secretaries. There were even plans to move Trevor James, and I will get back to that shortly. But due to certain actions taken by particular secretaries, the chief secretary could not publicly announce his intention to reshuffle all those secretaries. And therefore it came down to him identifying at least one person, and I saw the minority leader refer to him earlier on as the low fence, right? But I will call him the touchable, because clearly within this administration, there are touchables and untouchables. Let's look at Trevor James, for example. In 2 short years, he has distinguished himself as the most corrupt, the most arrogant, the most ridiculous, the most disrespectful secretary to have ever passed through the Tobago House of Assembly. The Division of Infrastructure and the Tobago House of Assembly, by extension, is facing several court matters that will cost taxpayers millions of dollars because of the actions of this particular secretary. We must also recall that this particular secretary lied openly and blatantly to the Tobago House of Assembly. We must also recall that this particular secretary broke the laws of Trinidad and Tobago on several occasions. Yet this secretary gets to keep his job. Let's look at maybe the next in line when it comes to worst performers in this Tobago House of Assembly will be the Chief Secretary himself. Now, let's face it, let's apply common sense here. We know the Chief Secretary is not going to remove himself, but he's right up there among the worst performers in this administration. As a matter of fact, he has overall responsibility for the Tobago House of Assembly executive. The laws gives him the power to rearrange and arrange his administration to the benefit of the people of Tobago. But of course, he's a coward. He's in cahoots with Trevor James and therefore unable to take any decisive action concerning this particular secretary. And I can point to others: Tasha Boris, Zorisha Hackett, Natisha Charles Pantin. Look at what is taking place in the Division of Agriculture and all the bacchanal with Tadco and those poor farmers having a hard time at the hands of Chairman Ricardo Alfred. Let's look at Ian Pollard down at Housing. This chief secretary is trying to convince us that out of all the non-performers in this administration, the most we can do is demote the low fence Terence Baines and reshuffle the substitutes. Have you ever seen a football match? And I'm talking to Kelvin now as a former footballer, and he probably considers himself still a good footballer. I don't know. But have you ever seen a football match where the manager of the team, in a situation where the team is playing poorly, instead of moving substitutes who may have some talent or some competence onto the field, he's prepared to reshuffle the substitutes. So the substitute that was sitting on the far left, he moved them to the far right. The one that was sitting in the middle, he moved them to the left. So you reshuffle the substitutes while the players on the field continue to play the fool of themselves and continue to cause total embarrassment to this island, causing us to look like a big joke. And that is what is taking place in Tobago. So, as I said, I don't want to talk too much again, but as I said, this reshuffle is a big joke. And if this is what the Chief Secretary took more than a year to come up with, then he should resign forthwith, because clearly he has lost control of his administration, he cannot control his secretaries, and clearly there are other people in other places calling the shots as it relates to the governance of Tobago. Because anybody, a baby will tell you that if there was going to be a serious reshuffle, the first secretary, the first neck that would have been on the chopping block would have been that of none other than Trevor James.
Thank you very much, political leader, for such a detailed breakdown of what we all know to have unfolded today. And heading back to the discussion now, I think we could safely say the Chief Secretary actually did fire himself, because he did indicate something to that effect.
Let us just, Mr. Moderator,
Indicated that
we just
he's
go.
going to.
No, I was just saying, let us just go through for the
So, Mr.
actual,
Director, could you pull back up the press release
and you
with
could
the
probably
reshuffle?
go through,
Right. So we see this begin with the Chief Secretary indicating the Chief Secretary, Honorable Fali Chavez Augustine, will present his final budget as Secretary of Finance, Trade and the Economy in June 2024. I think that we all are very, very happy about that. Effective July 1st, 2024, a new Secretary of Finance, Trade and the Economy will be announced and installed. We're going to get back to that because that has a bit of discussion in it. Further, the following are the changes in the composition of the island's government, the island government of Tobago, effective today, May 13, 2024. Assemblyman Sonny Craig, Assistant Secretary in the Office of the Chief Secretary, with specific responsibility for energy transition, carbon sequestration, and overarching environmental protection policies. Assemblyman Megan Morrison, Assistant Secretary in the Division of Health, Wellness and Social Protection, with specific responsibility for social support programs. Assemblyman Niall George, Assistant Secretary in the Division of Tourism, Culture, Antiquities and Transportation, with specific responsibility for sport tourism, community-based tourism and culture. Councillor Sertica Williams-Orr, Assistant Secretary in the Division of Finance, Trade and the Economy, with specific responsibility for reorganizing the HR structures of the division and the Department of Trade, as well as General Public Service Management. Councillor Orlando Kerr, Assistant Secretary in the Division of Settlements, Public Utilities and Rural Development, with specific responsibility for public utilities and rural development. Effective Tuesday, 14th of May, that's tomorrow, 2024, Assemblyman Terence Baines will be assigned the portfolio of Assistant Secretary in the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development, with specific responsibility for URP and maintenance. The team will also support the appointment of Assemblyman Terence Baines as Deputy Presiding Officer. Also effective Tuesday the 14th of May 2024, again tomorrow, Assemblyman Joel Sampson will be assigned the portfolio of Secretary of Community Development, Youth Development and Sport. All other secretaries and assistant secretaries will remain in their previously assigned positions. So panelists, let's start with the announcement that the Chief Secretary is reading his final budget, and then there is someone else is going to be appointed who seems to be a mystery at this point.
Well, what this signals to me is that the Chief Secretary also has admitted that he has failed as the Secretary of Finance.
Correct.
And I mean, so this is welcome news for us. But the question is, who is this? Who will replace the Chief Secretary, and why not indicate that person one time? So even for the person's own sake, even if they, but for the public knowledge and transparency, that people can begin to accept and see the role of this person, see if there's a best fit, because ultimately the public needs to, there needs to be stability and confidence. And the public at this time does not have confidence in this current administration. And the Chief Secretary owes it to the public to communicate to us. You cannot communicate to us via a paper. The
Correct.
people need to hear you. The people need to understand what are the considerations that would have motivated these changes. What are the considerations that would have led to you even announcing that you have removed all, because although this isn't included here, but you recall the office of the Deputy Chief Secretary
Yes.
Was
basically shut down. And so he has indicated that the Deputy Chief Secretary was incapable of managing both the portfolio of health and those assigned to her as Deputy Chief Secretary. And so he fired her and removed those positions. And now he has also said to himself he does not have the capacity to be the Chief Secretary and also
Financial Secretary.
the Division of Finance. So he has also fired himself. And what we are really seeing is an admittance that they are in fact incompetent. And if you move, whether you move incompetence left, right, or center, incompetence remains incompetence. And therefore it leaves us in Tobago with little hope. I believe Tobagonians were hoping to see some radical adjustment
Yes.
that may provide them with some sense of hope, because it also speaks to alignment of skills. When you have somebody like Sonny Craig, really nice guy, and then you take Sonny Craig and now give him these fancy words.
Yes.
Carbon sequestration.
With Israel.
What is the intent?
What is the intent?
What
And
is he
then
supposed to be doing?
Then we, in one breath, this administration claims to have little responsibility for the environment, because you will recall that last incident down at Corland, the secretary who had the responsibility for environment was basically calling on the EMA to act. And therefore, now you're seeing the chief secretary saying, I am assigning an assistant secretary with this specific portfolio of environment, to
Yes.
which I am also saying I do not have the power to act.
Yeah.
So what are you really giving him? What
you saying?
responsibility? And is it that the chief secretary is admitting that perhaps this assistant secretary is very limited and therefore he has limited his responsibilities? When you look at
No, but before
Yeah, go ahead.
before you jump off Assemblyman Craig, the challenge for me is, what is the administration's policy?
Exactly.
What is the policy as it relates to what you are now
Assigned.
assigning
Yeah.
to an assistant secretary?
Exactly.
More than that.
Just now, Councillor, because before you,
But not just the,
so
but
these
not
are
just
so
the-
these are
not just the policy. They record. What is their record on environmental matters, right?
What
And
is
it's
their
clear
record?
for all
Even?
to
well,
Right?
and I agree.
We
and I
have
agree
seen
with
the
political
record.
leader that their record is woeful on environmental issues. But my challenge is, you've now given an assistant secretary a specific portfolio for energy transition, carbon sequestration, and overarching environmental protection policies. But you as an administration, you have not shared with the population what is your policy as an administration as it treats with these, especially
Yeah.
the first two.
But
Energy
Because there's
transition and
none.
carbon
what is
sequestration.
also, I need
Because
clarity
there is
on.
no policy there.
And that is the point. There is no policy.
But
The fact is,
gentlemen,
there is no policy there. And we must understand, whether we like it or not,
Just no.
the reason for those movements at the level of the assistant secretaries was really for the chief secretary to save face. having recognized that he was in a position where he could not touch particular secretaries, then he had to resort to shifting around assistant secretaries, giving them portfolios with fancy names that mean absolutely nothing in the scheme of things. Right? Because at this stage, what is really this whole intent to put a man like Sonny Craig in the office of the Chief Secretary with responsibility for carbon sequestration and energy transition and all these things? What is really the intent when you move Sertica or into the Division of Finance, I think she is now, to treat with HR issues? All those things are really the remit of either a senior public servant like the Chief Administrator herself. There is also the MSU Department, Management Services Unit, which treat with those things in terms of the alignment of the divisions and the structures, especially HR related matters. And of course, in some cases, consultants will be utilized to treat with those things. So when you move Sertica O to really put her in a division where she will continue the destruction of Tobagonians' lives, because my understanding is that she is really the one behind all these restructurings aimed at weeding out certain people from divisions and firing them and causing pain and all of that. So when you move and you add these fancy names that really mean nothing, it was really an attempt to save face, having recognized that he could not touch Trevor James, he could not touch some of the other secretaries, right? And let me just say one thing on the Terrence Baines issue. We must remember, and this is politics now, that Terrence Baines joined the PDP by closing down another political party. You must remember that he was leader of the Tobago Forwards. He closed up that shop, closed down the party, and went across to join the PDP. And the intention was that he will carry the support of that Tobago Forwards base to the PDP. And therefore, he was a man of high esteem at that point, right? He was a man who earned tremendous respect and tremendous clout among the team. And it was for that reason, not out of competence or anything like that, it was for that reason and that reason only why he was given a secretarial portfolio and such an important one. But now the Chief Secretary realizes, well, out of all the secretaries, the only one I can touch is the pastor. Maybe the pastor might turn the other side, turn the other cheek, right? I can't touch Trevor. I can't touch Zorisha. I can't touch Whitey. I can't touch, who's the other incompetent one there, Tasha. So Trevor James, not Trevor, Terrence Baines is the low fence, right? By now we believe he no longer needs this man who came across from Tobago Forwards with all that political support. And therefore that is the only quote-unquote restructuring that could happen at the level of the secretaries. So it's really an attempt to save face. Let's not place any tremendous meaning or tremendous importance on all these names like energy transition and carbon. We must also remember that this same Chief Secretary set up a whole office of the Deputy Chief Secretary, all kind of fancy things. Tobago House in Trinidad, which was really supposed to work like a Tobago embassy for Tobagonians living in Trinidad. I think there was also a Department of Energy in the office of the Deputy Chief Secretary. All these fancy names that really mean nothing. Where is the Tobago House in Trinidad? Where is the office of the Deputy Chief Secretary now that had all these highly paid individuals? Director of Diaspora Affairs, Director of Energy, Director of this, Director of that, paid $30,000 per month in some cases. Where are all these people? Where is that division now? Where is that office now? Closed down. So the Chief Secretary is simply playing with words and trying to take Tobagonians for fools.
Thanks a lot. So, folks, we have an actual definition of carbon sequestration. This is the process of capturing and storing atmospheric carbon dioxide. It is one method of reducing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere with the goal of reducing global climate change. So now, Assemblyman Sonny Craig, we wish you all the best in that particular portfolio. Folks, we're running out of time, but I want to give everyone the opportunity to make your closing remarks.
Well, again, disappointing in terms of the reshuffle. What I am a bit comfortable about is that the Chief Secretary would have seen his inability to hold the two roles, that of the Division of Finance, Secretary of Finance, as well as Chief Secretary. So he has recognized his inability to do that and has decided to give up the role. Or, as the minority leader said, fire himself as the Secretary of Finance. We would have also seen where the Secretary, the Assistant Secretary, the new Assistant Secretary for Health, now has a portfolio of energy. And I am not sure if I missed it, but when this administration was sworn in, energy was under the Division of Education. And we had some misalignment because there was one time you heard where the former Deputy Chief Secretary was taking up responsibility. But the last time I checked on the website and on the division's page, energy still resides under the Division of Education. So I am not sure when the realignment may have occurred between the Division of Education and the Office of the Chief Secretary. So with this secretary, this new Assistant Secretary in the Office of the Chief Secretary having responsibility for energy, is it that energy is not reassigned, or that the Secretary really doesn't have?
Have they even considered that?
So I think for me, clarity needs to come there. And I am hoping that something will happen. Like, for all of us in Tobago, because we are seeing where everything is at a standstill. We were hopeful that this would bring some level of change, but it appears that that has not happened with what we are seeing here. So, Mr. Chief Secretary, I hope that you will have some level of
decency. Thank you very much.
Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to do what is necessary to bring betterment for Tobagonians.
Thanks very much, Minority Councillor. Senator Hislop.
My closing statement is my opening statement. This was expected because we've seen what this administration has to offer. 2.5 years, going on 3 years. I don't expect anything significant to change as a result of this reshuffle. And to echo the sentiments of the political leader, it was really an avenue for the Chief Secretary to save face after 2 years. After promising a reshuffle for 2 years, what we got is far from that. What we got is just tokenism by moving some assistant secretaries, not the persons who have direct responsibility over the divisions, but persons who are just there to assist the person who has direct responsibility. So I don't expect anything to change. It's unfortunate that this is where we are as an island. It speaks to the reason why things are as stagnant as they are and nothing seems to be happening in Tobago, because you have an administration that clearly is out of its depth, that clearly has gotten to its peak of performance, and we should not expect anything significant for the next year or so. We really shouldn't. If it happens, we thank the Lord. But we shouldn't expect anything significant.
Thanks very much, Senator. Minority Leader.
Well, for me, this has been an unfortunate anticlimax, you know.
Yes, Director.
For all of us who know about getting very excited.
Premature.
And, you know,
This is a serious matter.
I mean, we can laugh about it because the truth is what we've gotten there was really a joke.
Yeah.
And when you look at it in the face of everything, if you're talking about serious governance, you taking basically assistant secretaries and moving them around. As the political leader said that analogy used about the football team, and I could tell you any coach that would have a team and believe the solution to the team is by changing the subs who is not on the field playing. Then you know that coach isn't worth.
You need to fire that coach.
You need to fire that coach.
Yeah.
So therefore, if we're to take that same approach, this chief secretary really needs to fire himself from chief secretary, because he just does not have the, as I said before, he does not have the will to make serious decisions. And this is what you get when you get a populist leader.
Yes.
This is what you get when you have a leader that simply
wants everybody to like him.
He wants everybody to like him and wants to please everyone. So therefore, this is why we had to wait over a year and a half to hear that, to see the chief secretary change, reshuffle some secretaries, some assistant secretaries, because this chief secretary would have gone around and recognized at every block when he tried to move someone, they were saying, "I'm not moving."
Resistance.
And he was getting the resistance. So as far as I understand, this has been a cowardly move, because the person who he has changed as the one place of the motion, it was done. That's why it had to be done as a press release.
Yes.
Couldn't even call his executive together and
to stand behind him,
because some of them
like audio
Like they did for you.
like audio gate, stand behind him.
Correct. So this is one of a coward, a cowardly bully. This move, I do not anticipate it bringing about any significant change, because they have not significantly moved anything. You have also failed to address some of the fundamental issues, which is one, up to this point, there's no economic framework upon which policies are being built.
Yes.
And if you're not going to treat with those fundamental areas, then you can put captain or cook, you will still get same failed results. And that is where I was hopeful that the chief secretary would come to us, articulate from a perspective of policy and a framework,
Strategic
what is the strategic alignment of these moves. And I did not get that. So looking at anything else is nothing but a sham, and as the political leader said, an opportunity to save face, because you had gone to the point now where you have promised this reshuffle for over a year and a half, and you just had to give the population something. So I don't see, I love to be an optimist. I always try to see the best in situations, and I guess the best I can see is commending young Joel Samson, who I know is an avid sports person, a young person. So perhaps we may see some kind of movement happening in the field of community development, youth and sport. But outside of that, in the areas that are really critical to driving Tobago's economic development trust and really improving the lives of the people, I am left quite disappointed.
I must agree with you. And finally, political leader, closing remarks.
Well, in closing, I want to introduce another element to this thing. Leaders must, as far as is possible, remain above reproach. Leaders must conduct themselves with integrity and with decency, because there will come a time where, as the leader, action may need to be taken against the persons that you may lead in the best interest of the whole. And the sad reality is the chief secretary is not above reproach. The chief secretary has not been leading by example, and therefore it is difficult for him, even in cases where the action is warranted and needed, it is extremely difficult or almost impossible for him to take the necessary actions, for him to remove some of the incompetent secretaries from those offices. Satan cannot correct sin. The Chief Secretary lacks the moral authority to really discipline any of those secretaries. Because if he had it, if he had any sense of decency, if he had any sense of moral authority, he would have taken the requisite actions on this occasion to ensure that there is some improvement in the performance of this administration. And if he had done so, then Trevor James could not still be today the Secretary of Infrastructure for obvious reasons. Tasha Boris could not still be today the Secretary of Tourism and Culture in a situation where our culture has been virtually destroyed, where our tourism is failing, where the festivals on the island are being mismanaged and some have been destroyed. Natisha Charles Pantin could not today be the Secretary of Agriculture in a situation where TADCO has been destroyed. The agricultural sector has hit rock bottom. Ian Pollard could not still be today the Secretary of Housing. And I can go on and on. But again, we are in the very unfortunate position as an island where our leader has misbehaved himself from audio gate and even to his very dealings with the same Secretary of Infrastructure who is in cahoots with and cannot touch. As a result of that, we must put up for the next 18 months or so with mismanagement, with incompetence, and with an administration that cannot deliver to the people of Tobago, that cannot fix anything more than their own personal pockets and circumstances.
Thank you very much, political leader. And I want to thank our panelists in studio for this discussion today and for you, the viewing public. Many of you would have logged on to be a part of it. I want to encourage you to stay tuned for the Minority Report as well tomorrow evening at 8 p.m. The conversation continues, but not just this, but a number of unfolding matters that are going to be ventilated. Do not miss that program tomorrow night. So I want to say thank you. And God bless. Have a wonderful rest of the day, Maryland. David, your host, saying good evening.
You can shuffle that same deck of cards a million times. The outcome will almost be the same because the possibilities are limited by the number of cards in that deck. And so all that we are seeing is the moving around of incompetence from one area to another area.